What's up, everybody? Today on the Yours Truly podcast, I have Dr. Roy Clouser in the virtual studio. Last week, I received a cryptic message from a certain CW Weeks, a longtime contributor to this little corner of the internet, YouTube community. CW wanted to inquire if I would be willing to practice some conversation craft with a certain Dr. Roy Clouser here on the Yours Truly podcast. After listening to CW explain Dr. Clouser's academic pedigree and philosophical expertise, I was finding it hard to understand why I was a good choice for this conversation. I have a very humble academic background and a very basic foundation in philosophy. Ironically, this was the reason CW thought it would be a good idea. That maybe through this medium, Dr. Clouser's distinct ideas can reach and begin to influence a wider range of meaning seekers outside his classroom and the dusty halls of academia. For more than 50 years, Dr. Clouser has been diligently studying, teaching, writing, and ministering as a Christian philosopher. He received his undergraduate in philosophy from Gordon College, a divinity degree from Reformed Episcopal Seminary, attended Harvard Graduate School in the History and Philosophy of Religion department, and ended up finishing his Master's of Arts in Philosophy at the University of Pennsylvania. And he is currently Professor Emeritus of Philosophy and Religion at the College of New Jersey, all the while doing the faithful work of attempting to chip away at some of the perennial problems and continually wrestled with in and outside of Christianity. Problems such as the supposed gap between science and religious belief, argued in his first book, The Myth of Religious Neutrality, an essay on the hidden role of religious belief in theories. Published in 1991, it's been translated into Korean, Portuguese, German, and Spanish, and was nominated by Notre Dame Press for the American Academy of Religion's Excellence Award, as well as the Gruyère Award in Religion. Dr. Clouser's second book, Knowing with the Heart, introduces the idea of the enlightenment of the heart, of which Scripture speaks of in connection with the conversion, is equivalent to what mathematicians and philosophers have called self-evidence. That is, it is an intuitive experience of the gospel. That is the truth about God from God. The grounds for belief in God are defended as experiential. His latest unpublished work and forthcoming book entitled Can We Know God is Real is an apologetic work developing Clouser's ideas from his aforementioned book, Knowing with the Heart, and is a stated prequel to his first book, The Myth of Religious Neutrality, advocating for the idea that discovering the truth about God's reality is a matter of experience, not proof. It contains the line, God is not a conclusion at the end of a chain of reasoning. God is the subject of an experience report. The book then compares Christianity with the three versions of atheism that are now prevalent in philosophy: hard materialism, soft materialism, and the mind-body dualism. Dr. Clouser is also the author of many academic and popular articles, and I think I would be remiss to say that he has been heavily influenced by the work of the Dutch Reformed philosopher Dr. Herman Dooyeweerd. There's so much I want to converse about with Dr. Clouser today, and it's my great pleasure and honor to get to know him, learn from him, and help share in his ideas along with and to you all. So without any further delay, I give you Dr. Roy Clouser. Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud. And we're recording. Thank you for being here with me today, Dr. Clouser.
My pleasure.
Yeah, so CW Weeks sent me your way or something along those lines.
Right.
To bring your work more into the YouTube space, into this so-called corner of the internet that we play around with, the ideas, downstream from Jordan Peterson, down around the figure of Paul van der Klee, bumping up against people like John Vervaeke and Jonathan Pageau. So we'll get into your work, but to kind of get things started, I wanted to ask you a little bit about who you are and what makes a Roy Clouser, and what's the story behind the man writing the books, And what set you on this quest to prove to some degree the reality of God?
Sure. What set me on the quest was exactly expressed in the title of that book. When I was raised in a Christian home, my parents were dedicated Baptists, and I was raised as a Christian, and I'm very grateful for that. But I used to ask my parents and people at church and so on, even when I was a little kid, how do we know Scripture comes from God? Why isn't it the Buddhist writings or the Hindu writings and stuff like? When I was real little, I didn't know about them, but I'm still puzzled about the question. I should explain that although I had a good background in Christianity, my parents were also extreme fundamentalists.
Yeah.
When I say extreme, let me describe a little bit about that. I remember one day I came home from school, I was in fourth grade, and I told my mother how excited I was over a class we had. We learned that the stars were massive balls of gases concentrated, and so that they glowed, and I went on with what we had learned. And my mother said, "You don't really believe that, do you?" And I couldn't imagine why not. I was stunned. And she said, "Don't you think if that were true, the Bible would have told us?" Now, it's one thing to say there's nothing in the Bible that could possibly be wrong about anything. I don't think that's true. I mean, details that don't matter. You know, when Paul says, for example, bring those manuscripts that I left at Troas to somebody, you know, Timothy or whoever it is supposed to bring them. The answer might have been, you didn't leave them here, you must have left them somewhere else. That could be, you know what I mean? That we don't have to get really picky about that kind of stuff. But to say that everything that's true and worth knowing has to be in the book somewhere is unbelievable. I mean, what does the book say about metal stress or heat transfer? What does it say about airspace rights? I mean, that's almost ridiculously foolish. But they were very greatly under the influence of the Philadelphia School of the Bible. They had, right after my mom and dad had met, even before they were married, they attended classes there together. And they came away with a very anti-intellectualist, anti-education, anti-science attitude. So when I think I was in junior high, and my mom said to me, "You're at an age where you may hear your classmates talking about going to college. I just thought I'd tell you how we feel about that. We don't see why any Christian would go to college. It's just a place that ridicules your faith. If you get older and decide you want to go, we won't try to stop you, but don't look to us to support it." And that was the first and last conversation we ever had on the topic. It's, of course, historically, it's a little ironic that universities were all founded by Christians and so on. But it's you know, a kind of I don't know what to call it, a myopic view of reality. Anyway, that's how I was raised. In high school, I decided, I don't know why, that I did want to go to college. So I saved up all the money I made mowing lawns and shoveling walks and babysitting and all that. And when I got to be a senior, I had $750 in the bank. And I had been very active in music. I played trombone in a group that got hired by a radio program that was broadcast every Saturday night from Times Square in New York.
Wow, fun.
ABC network. It was a kind of Billy Graham type evangelistic program. And so I spent the 2.5 years of my high school going to New York every Saturday and playing in this, coming back. And I decided maybe I would go into music. So I mentioned that to my parents. Now you realize I never took SATs. I never visited a campus. I didn't talk to counselors because you can't talk to them. They're not real Christians. Why don't you ask our church choir director where he went? So I did. And he told me, and I went there. And a year there was $750. So I gave him all my money and I went. Now, the music courses actually weren't that bad. I won't mention the college because I'm going to say that the rest of it wasn't worth the powder to blow it up. When you say to a couple of guys, you're standing around just hanging in the men's dorm, hey, let's go over to the hub and get a soda. And they say, well, no, it's kind of late. I said, what do you mean? The hub doesn't close till late. Well, it's getting dark. What are you guys afraid of the dark? They said, it's not that. There might be demons in the bushes. Now I came to the instant conclusion that I had paid my money to go to a madhouse. Anyway, I met a new friend. I made a new friend at my church. This was a non-denominational fundamentalist church. And I don't know why his parents decided to go there. His background was the opposite of mine. His parents were college grads. Mine had never finished high school. They sent him to Episcopal Academy, and he was graduating from Haverford College, top places, and so on. And he said to me, next fall, I'm going to Reformed Episcopal Seminary. Wouldn't it be great if we went together? Now, I should explain, the seminary did take people without having done college first. In fact, they emphasized that there were real advantages to doing that seminary, then college, if you could do it. What they didn't tell me was that 66% of the people that tried it flunked. I'm glad I didn't know that. But at any rate, at his urging, we both entered that seminary in together. That was the fall of 1956.
A few years ago.
A few years ago, yes. And so now I'm entering a gray stone Gothic building where there's a great emphasis on scholarship. The professors have collars. This is like I feel like Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah.
I don't know my way around. I don't know what's going on half the time. So I go to the first class. I can't help tell you this one. The first class, the first day, is elementary Greek. This seminary required 3 years of Greek and 3 years of Hebrew of everybody.
Wow.
Yeah, 3 years of theology and so on. They had no electives.
That's serious.
Yeah. Go to first class, first day is elementary Greek. Professor comes in the room. He's very tall. He has what looks like a dueling scar over one eye. His last name is Prussian. And he walks to the front of the class and he says, I can't do the voice. He sounded like the Jolly Green Giant. Gentlemen, this is the elimination course. My calling is to keep men out of the ministry. I consider my test a success when the blood is 4 feet deep and the bodies are floating around the room.
That's amazing.
Yeah, those are his exact words. You can see why I never forgot him.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's terrifying. So, in fact, they had chapel every Wednesday, and they would have 2 seniors conduct a service from the prayer book, and then each preach a short sermon. And there's a faculty critic there who grades them, comments on them, and it's the same professor. So these 2 seniors get up, they conducted a service well, and then they preached. The first one, I thought that was really mediocre, but the second one was horrible. I actually thought to myself, I don't want to sound like a wise guy. I mean, I'm just a kid here. I'm sitting there and saying, that's a job of somebody that's already finished 2 years of seminary and is a senior. I could do better than that right now. I'm sorry to say I actually thought that. Anyway, I then thought, how is this professor ever going to tell this guy tactfully and gently that this really wasn't any good? I needn't have worried. He walked to the front of the room and he said, that sermon was a stench in the nostrils of God. Anyway, I knew I had come to the right place. I just loved it. I ate it up. And then when by the time I was in the middle year there, I knew that my calling was philosophy of religion. I was concerned mainly with what they call in a seminary apologetics, the defense of faith, and answering my own question, how do we know Scripture comes from God? I had gotten some answers there. One time our church had a speaker from Moody Bible Institute, and my mom said, I've invited him to dinner after church. Why don't you ask him that question? So I waited and I kept my mouth shut through all the adult conversation. I think I was 12, 13. And then guy's putting on his coat, getting ready to leave. And I said, hey, Mom. And she said, oh, yes, our son has a question for you. And so this guy's got his coat and hat on. He's ready to walk out the door. And I said, how do we know Scripture comes from God? He said, oh, yes, of course. Yes. Well, the Bible has sold more copies than any other book in history.
Wow.
And he left. And my mom looked at the look on my face and said, you're disappointed, aren't you? I mean, I wasn't very old, but I'm old enough to know that was a pretty stupid answer.
I've got a story for you about, I got my undergrad in biblical studies. They didn't even require, but I ended up taking a year of Greek and Hebrew. But I had started as a music major. And you can see keyboard. I did a lot of the contemporary Christian worship music in churches and stuff for a long time. Well, that was my goal, was to go there, and I wanted to be able to lead worship at this Christian college and meet people and learn how to do that better. There weren't any formalized, even at like early 2000s, there weren't formalized studies for that. So I have about a year and a half in, I decided, actually, I think I want to do a biblical studies major instead of music. And, I wasn't an academic. That wasn't really like my aim. I liked ideas. I liked theology. I was interested, but I was not academically, my mindset wasn't academic. So the big hard course, the professor that had a similar reputation was for our church history class, which I ended up taking. I liked it so much, I took it twice.
That's something.
The first time I remember, we were supposed to be writing essays, dialoguing with this. I think actually it was an essay about Martin Luther, and I was up late. I had procrastinated, and this is right, probably 2005. The internet was starting to get its legs for research in the undergrad times, and I thought, oh man, what's this? Oh, Wikipedia. Oh, this is perfect. And so I used Wikipedia as my main source for my paper. And I get the next week, the professor's going through all the papers, and he's going through, this is trash. And this is, look at this red, it's inked up with red. And he gets to mine, and I'm sitting close to the front. He just looks at me and says, and Baxter, don't cite Wikipedia as a source on a paper. Sure, you can appreciate.
Okay, we've somewhat parallel stories there so far. Well, I got to be a senior in seminary. I was convinced that my calling was to teach, and it would be philosophy of religion. It's what would be called in a college or university, would be the specialty. But now I needed to finish my undergraduate work, or the seminary wouldn't give me a degree. And in my senior year, in between the two semesters in January, the Dutch philosopher Herman Dooyeweerd gave 5 lectures in Philadelphia. That's where Reformed Episcopal Seminary was. He didn't give them at the seminary, he gave them at another seminary. But he had been on a speaking tour. He had spoken at Harvard, I think Yale, and then he had come down to Penn and the seminary. And I heard him give these 5 lectures. And there's a lot in it I didn't understand, but there was a good bit I did. And this guy is maybe the first in the history of Christianity to propose that there is and needs to be such a thing as a Christian philosophy. Almost all the major thinkers, the church fathers, Augustine, Anselm, Aquinas, whoever you want to pick, they all said there was no such thing as a Christian philosophy. There's Christian theology, and then there can be a Christian version of any philosophy. He said, no, there's a distinctly Christian view. And I was really fascinated by that. So I'm now thinking about where to finish, where to go back to college and finish. And somebody told me that there was a college named Gordon College in the north part of Massachusetts. I'd never heard of it. I didn't know anything about it, except that this person said they offer a course on Dooyeweerd. So I wrote to them, I applied, sight unseen, and I was accepted. When I got there, I found out they did not have a course on Dooyeweerd. They had a course on contemporary philosophy for philosophy majors, and in that course, the person who was teaching it covered Dooyeweerd as one figure in on the contemporary scene. But I found all that out after they gave me a scholarship for the first year, and I went up. And it's a very funny story about arriving there. I'd never been to the north part of Massachusetts, and I'm finding my way along the route on the map and so on. I get to Grapevine Road and the turn in to the college parking lot. And as I'm coming in, I have the radio on. The Boston Symphony is playing Mendelssohn's Fifth Symphony. That's the Reformation Symphony. So as I'm pulling in, on the Boston Symphony is playing A Mighty Fortress Is Our God. I pull in, and there's a professor walks across the parking lot with a copy of Dooyeweerd's book under his arm. And I took it as a sign.
I like it.
Yeah. So I went there. Of course, I've had to support myself, and I had a scholarship for the first year, so I didn't have to worry about tuition, but books and so on, it's all on me to work and pay for the whatever is necessary at the college and squeeze in studying when I can and so on. So I was terrified that I was going to run out of money or employment or a place to live, or there were so many things that could go wrong here that I was really scared I wouldn't finish. So what I did was way overload my schedule. I took 27, 28 hours. I did 3 years in 2.
Yeah.
And by my senior year, it looked like I was going to make it. I'm cleaning houses in the town, and I was conducting choir at the Russian Baptist Church in Peabody, Massachusetts, and I was teaching the fellowship in the evening, Sunday evenings at the Presbyterian Fellowship and stuff. I'm piecing stuff together. But between the semesters, Gordon College had all the seniors, the graduating seniors, take the GRE exams. The graduate record exams, for your viewers that don't know about them, are the equivalent of SATs that you take in high school to get into college. The GREs are to get into graduate school. And not all graduate schools require them. The ones I was thinking about didn't, so I didn't think I needed them. But the college required everyone to take them and paid for them. If they hadn't paid for them, done that, I never would have taken them because I couldn't afford it. but I took them. And in those days, well, here's what, there were more exams than they gave, but here what they gave was 3 1-hour exams in the morning, 9 to 12. Social sciences, natural sciences, humanities, 1 hour each. A 1 hour break for lunch, and from 1 to 4, a 3-hour exam in your major, which is philosophy. So I took them, and I'm having fun. I don't need them, right? I'm looking at the other guys who told me they were interested in graduate school, and they're all sweating bullets, and I'm giving them stuff like that, and just fooling around with them. So now I have, after the exam, I came down to the Philadelphia area, which was where the 2 schools were that I thought I had the best chance of applying. I'd made contacts while I was at seminary and at Reformed Episcopal. And I had an interview at each of them. They each told me they couldn't take me. The first one was a master's program endowed by an endowment that stipulated preference had to be given to Quakers. And they said, I'm sorry, but we've had 2 applicants this year who are Quakers, and we have to give them preference. And the second was a seminary doctoral program that said, wait a minute, you did a year at college, then you went to seminary. When you went back to college, Gordon gave you credit for some of the things you did seminary. So you're not a graduate student. We'll take you as an undergraduate, but no school in the U.S. is going to take you as a graduate student. So I went back to the Gordon campus very discouraged. And then the GREs came back. And to my great surprise, my scores were over the moon. So I went to my advisor in the philosophy department, wonderful man, Grady Spires, who was finishing his dissertation at Harvard. And I said, what do you think? Is it worth me applying? And he said, all you got to lose is a stamp. So I wrote a letter, and to my amazement, I got an interview. I knew what this guy was going to say. He's going to look at Gordon College, where I was summa cum laude. He's going to look at the seminary, where I was summa cum laude, and he's going to say, well, this looks good, but I never heard of these places. Why should I take you? Actually, and I kept the GREs inside my jacket pocket. See, a little dramatic flair I had in mind.
Yeah.
But when I put he put the transcript out on his desk, he said more than that. He said, I've never heard of these places, and we've already turned down people from Yale and Cornell who studied with friends of mine. Why should I take you? And I said, well, that's what I expected you to say. So I brought this, and I whip out GRs and put him. I brought this as corroboration. He did something I've never seen before and never seen since. He moved his cigarette from the middle of his mouth round to the side and held it in his molars without touching it. And he turned around, swiveled around, and called somebody up and said, what do we usually do with somebody that scored? And he read the scores off, and that's what I thought. Boom. He hangs up. He says to me, I see that you, at Gordon College, you took epistemology. What'd you read in that course? And we had read 2 books by A.J. Ayer, who was the leading spokesman for logical positivism. This is a view that wants to say that science is everything, and whatever isn't science isn't just false. It doesn't rise to that dignity. It's meaningless. So it's neither true nor false. It was an extreme view that had been critiqued severely in the late 50s and collapsed by the early 60s. This is 1961. I'm having this interview at Harvard. So this guy asked me what I thought of Ayer, and I started ripping into Ayer, and I didn't know who I was talking to. He says, oh, well, none of us call ourselves positivists anymore. And I thought I had really blown it. That's foot and mouth, man. You just blew it. Anyway, he says, okay, we're going to find a way to get you here. We only have 12 students in this program, and we've already taken 12, but we'll find a way to get you here anyway. But meanwhile, one more thing, I want to see a paper you wrote. So I go home and I look at the papers. By this time, I was supporting myself as a minister in charge of the Evangelical United Brethren Church of Central Square, Cambridge. It had 80 members when I took the position and 90 when I left.
There you go.
Anyway, I look at these, and I thought the best paper I had written was on a French Christian existentialist. Now, that's as far as you can get from a logical positivist. It's the other extreme. And I hesitated. Can I send this to a guy who used to be a positivist and now is still trying to be as close to that as possible, obviously? And I agonized over. Finally, I put it in the envelope and mailed it. I said, the hell with it. I'm not going to go nuts with this. When I arrived the next fall in the program, the History and Philosophy of Religion program had a speaker a guest speaker for the year. It was Gabrielle Marcel. I couldn't believe it. I actually went and tried to listen to some of his lectures, but between the echo in the hall and his accent, I couldn't understand him, so I gave up. But if you talk about providence,
so that was the French. That was the French.
I don't know how you could. I sent him a paper on the one guy that they're having come as the guest speaker in the program.
Wow.
Anyway, I was there for a year. I studied with Paul Tillich and Richard Niebuhr and Richard Niebuhr and Heiko Obermann, the historian, and I had Ernest Wright, the archaeologist for Old Testament. It was a cavalcade of stars, and it was absolutely wonderful year academically.
I even recognize a few of those names.
Yeah. Of course, I had one meal a day and no meat all winter. And when I got the free medical exam that's given to all the graduate students, the doctor said, "What's the matter with you? Have you been sick?" And I explained that wasn't the problem. Anyway, I got called in spring for follow-up interview, and the guy said, I didn't even know what my grades were at this point. He looks down at his file and says, well, you have all honors grades, and so you certainly come back, but in good conscience, I couldn't recommend it. The program looks like it's on its way out. I'm going to Oxford next year. Cohen and Lehman have resigned. Tillich is retired. Who would you write with? We should talk about transferring. And I said, well, I was thinking about Penn. Oh, that's a great idea. Why don't you do that? I'll write you a letter. I have friends there and blah, blah, blah. So I went down. I had an interview at Penn, and they took me into the PhD program there. And the chairman of the department was a Harvard grad, Harvard PhD. Yeah. So that's how I came to end up at Penn, where I got the MA and PhD writing on Dooyeweerd. Yeah.
Okay. And that sets you off on this course. And then, for I guess, was your first book related to your dissertation or your thesis? Or?
Yes. The dissertation had been on Dooyeweerd. The committee at Penn said, the chairman at Penn said, put it this way to me when I asked to write on him, we're going to approve this dissertation on two conditions. One is you have to go there and work on it with him. And he engineered to get me a Harrison Fellowship, and I went over there for the summer of 1967. That was the first time I met him. And then he said the second condition is that he writes me a letter and says, you got him right. Nobody here is going to read all his stuff and examine you on whether you got him right. We will examine you on whether you think he is right.
Okay.
So in the summer of 67, I went over to Amsterdam, and my contact was the Free University where he had taught. He was then retired, and the people at the university were very accommodating. They had found me an apartment and stuff like that. And the secretary of the department said, "Now I have an appointment with you with Vollenhoven and De Boer and Riesen and you know, all these people. And then next Tuesday you see Dooyeweerd." And I said, "Whoa, wait a minute." I spent the entire fellowship and an advance on my salary to come here and work all summer with Dooyeweerd. I only have one appointment. And he said, obviously, he doesn't even work here anymore. It's up to him whether he wants to see you. I mean, he's not obliged. And I've realized, of course, how foolish I had been to assume that they could set up a whole bunch of appointments. Why would the guy agree to that? He doesn't know me from Adam. So the next Tuesday rolls around and I'm on the tram going to Dooyeweerd's house, wondering what I'm going to say that's going to get him to invite me back. And nothing came to me. So I arrived at his door with nothing in mind or in hand. His housekeeper opened the door and said, "He's up in his study." I went up and he was very gracious. "How can I help you?" And I said, this is all spur of the moment. I said, "Well, since I've arrived, I've been here about a week. And since I've arrived, I've spoken with a number of people. And every single one of them has told me that I'm not understanding you right. So why don't I tell you what I think is going on in the New Critique of Theoretical Thought?" This was his big work. It was 3 volumes, very complicated, difficult to read. I said, "Why don't I tell you what's going on and you stop me when I'm wrong?" He said, "Go ahead." So I start in. And I go on and on, and I went on for about 40 minutes. And he finally started to laugh. He said, "Who told you that's wrong?"
Yep.
"That's what I want to hear." So I named all the people. He said, "So many misunderstandings." And then this is spur of the moment. I said, "Well, if that is right, I have a problem." And I took a sheet of paper and I put down what I thought were the main claims of the New Critique in logical notation. Then I put down the main conclusion in logical notation and constructed a proof that it was an invalid argument. In other words, the conclusion didn't follow from the premises. And he looked at that and he said, "Well, nobody's ever made that criticism before." But it was obvious why the conclusion didn't follow. There was another option that hadn't been ruled out. So we both instantly focused on that, started to talk about how to deal with that option. And he said, "Well, it's getting late. When can you come back?"
There's the golden words.
So I saw him every Tuesday for the rest of the summer. We had 2.5 hours an evening. And then Andy invited me to dinner. So that was a wonderful summer for me.
I can't imagine, that like the thread for you going back to that, seeing I guess those lectures, and that was in your beginning of your undergrad, correct? When you saw him lecture in.
No, that was one. Yeah, well, I was at seminary. It was my senior year.
Yeah,
seminary.
And he became kind of this, icon that you were aiming at, and then to be able to develop a real, actual relationship.
Yeah,
and respect.
I never ever thought, even imagined could happen. No, the follow up to that is that I went back. I'm working, and I have a family, and so it took me some years to put together a dissertation. And when I did that, I kept in communication with him. Communication means airmail.
That's right.
Right. You can call somebody on the phone, but to do that, you have to put your name on a list for your call to go across the transatlantic cable and ring a phone somewhere in Amsterdam. It would be a central location. It wouldn't be his house. And so and he's what, 78 years old or something, and he's not going to go down and into central answer and to answer the phone at 3 a.m. I mean, whenever your call comes up, it's up. That's 4 a.m. Doesn't matter. You take your turn when it comes, and it costs $20 a call.
Wow.
$20 a minute, excuse me, for a call. And that's when that was a lot more money than it is now. So that's out. So we're communicating by airmail. And finally, I wrote to him and I said, trying to do this by airmail is like trying to play chess by mail. It would be better, I think, if I came back and went all over this with you. And he agreed. So the free university gave me airfare. And a friend I had made while I was there, one of the people I consulted with, was Johann van der Hoeven, the professor of modern philosophy. A wonderfully gifted person. He was very sharp and a very subtle mind and very friendly. We really hit it off. He took me around Amsterdam and stuff, and just great. And he said to me, don't rent a room. We just moved. We have a big house. The third floor is empty. Come stay with us.
Wow.
So I went there in August to September of 71 and went all over the dissertation with Dooyeweerd, came back, revised and fixed it up, and proposed that my committee that we set a date for the oral exam. Now, in Europe, an oral exam of a PhD dissertation is a formality. You hire a caterer, you invite all your friends and relatives, you're going to get a PhD that day. People will ask you questions and you try to answer them, but nothing hangs on how you do that. That's not true in the US. In the US, you can do all the courses, you can pass the PhD exams, pass the 2 language exams, get the topic approved, get a committee together and the topic approved, write the dissertation, the committee approves that it's ready to be defended. You go to the oral defense and you can be failed. In fact, one of the first stories I heard when I transferred to Penn was about a fellow to whom that happened. And he decided not to be defeated. He got a new topic, a new committee, wrote another dissertation. They approved it. He came up for defense and they failed him again.
Wow.
That's a horror story nobody wants to hear.
Do you feel like the standards are still that high across the board?
Oh, yeah.
I had another question on
that.
Yeah.
The people that form these committees at the graduate schools and so on rightfully know that they're the gatekeepers to that profession. The people they approve of, the people they grant a degree to, are going to be the people that do it to the next generation.
Yeah.
You want the best people that you can get. Not only do you not have to be a dummy at Penn, they actually cared about moral uprightness. I don't mean that they sent out the moral police to investigate
Sure.
people. One of my classmates told me that the way he put it was, my wife is stupid and she got pregnant, so we sold the baby on the black market. And I said something to a friend of his, did he really do that? And the friend said, well, it happened twice, actually.
Wow.
Now, I did not blow the whistle on him, but the graduate group committee got wind of that, flunked him out on the spot.
One of the things you mentioned in that story with Dooyeweerd was the fact that trying to communicate through writing just couldn't work, and you needed the embodied connection, the conversation.
Yeah.
One of the thoughts I've been having recently was the idea about the Reformation and the figures at play, with that being the primary mode for trying to parse out the problems of the church.
Sure.
And how that, it was a little struggle for us to get online here today, but we're talking hours and hours apart, and we can have a likely fairly productive conversation, and now we could show each other. Even if I wanted to, I could show you something I've written. I could put it on the screen, and well, that I'm assuming a lot of that during that time, it was all writing, and it took days and weeks and months for those communications to take place. If you were trying to converse with somebody else you're trying to deal with these ideas about. And I just think that we've been in that stage for a long time, and we're kind of entering into a stage where we can actually do both write and converse.
Well, they tried to, even in the 16th century. I mean, for example, Luther met with other people, debated them. They had discussions about this stuff at length when they could. The problem was that it was so difficult to travel and so expensive, and so it wasn't easy to just go to Paris and talk to so-and-so. But so they relied a lot on the writing, yeah. But
so I guess I'm wondering what's going to happen with this new medium.
Yeah,
with
amazing.
Yeah, with the future of, and that kind of leads us. I don't know if you're ready to kind of talk about your upcoming work and some of your recent work. I wanted to read a quote from your introduction, from your upcoming book.
Sure.
It was, and kind of play off even this idea that I just kind of hit on with Martin Luther a little bit. In order to compare the Christian and atheist answers, and this is from your upcoming book entitled "Can We Know God is Real? The Possibility and Nature of Certainty About God."
Yeah.
In order to compare the Christian and atheist answers, we will also examine 3 widespread misunderstandings of Christianity, 2 of which are ensconced in the theological traditions with a long history. The first mistake identifies the nature of God with Plato's idea of perfections. That idea has such a hold on the Catholic and Protestant theology that most Anglo-American discussions of religious belief show no awareness that there is an alternative position. The alternative I have in mind is the theology of the Eastern Orthodox Church. This same alternative was discovered by Luther and Calvin in the 16th century and championed by the 20th century by the Swiss theologian Karl Barth. But on the whole, Protestantism has not embraced it. Correcting the Platonized idea of God, as I see it, for developing a proper reply to the best argument for atheism, the argument called the problem of evil. So you've got a lot going on there, specifically contrasting between the 3 large bodies of the Christian tradition: Catholic, Orthodox, Protestantism. In this small community around my channel, I would venture to say that there are Christians within each of those stripes. What's the mistake of partnering the Christian God with Plato's ideas of perfection? I'm assuming maybe it's largely influenced by Augustine, and I also assume that the answers you're going to be pointing to in Calvin, Luther, and the Orthodox thinking revolves something around or like the personal. And what was Barth's contribution in this, and how does all this converge to answer to deal with the theodicy, the problem of evil? I know it's the easy answer. I mean, it's one word answer, something.
Right? How long is this session? 8 hours?
we got some time.
Okay, I'll try to give a quick overview. All right. Plato had a theory that goes like this. All of the qualities that we see that things have in the world around us, whether that's being square or heavy or red or hot or smooth, and so on, anything, and all the mathematical truths and all the logical truths are actually in another realm of reality. That is the perfect or infinite mode of them is in another reality. What we see around us are imperfect copies of those infinite perfections in another realm. So when we see that something's green here, the perfect green in the infinite modes in the other realm. All the logical truths, all the mathematical truths, all the numbers are in that realm of perfections. We have the idea of a perfect triangle, but nothing we draw is a perfect triangle. We can't make such a thing. But the perfect triangle's in the other realm. There is the perfect, and I'm going to phrase it this way. This is Aristotle's way of putting it. The perfect what it is to be a tree or what it is to be a horse. There isn't a perfect horse in the other realm, but there's a perfect formula for what it is to be a horse. And all horses in this world are imperfect copies of that definition of perfection. That's what's in the other realm. And St. Augustine read that and also noticed then that Plato said that there was a supreme perfection, the perfection of all perfections. And he called it the God and Father of all things. And Augustine says, see, he got it right. Plato arrived at our God. He just thought that all the perfections were individual items in this other realm. He didn't know that all the perfections are in one being, God. He missed that because he didn't have revelation. But God is the being with all and only perfections. That's the shift. He isn't the first person who has suggested it. Origen suggested that before him. There may have been one or two others, but Augustine really gives impetus to this view. He writes about this stuff in The City of God and De Trinitate, and I have all the quotes there in the text. I consider that the fall of Western theology on a par with the fall of Adam and Eve from God's grace in Eden. The Bible never uses the word perfection once about God. It doesn't say anything about there being a realm of perfections. It's easy for us to say, well, there's a heavenly realm and it's got to be better than this one. Maybe it's perfect. But the Jewish idea of perfection means complete. See, the only time Jesus used the term was when he said to his disciples, you be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. Now, if he meant what Augustine took it to mean, he'd be telling them to be God, which he certainly wouldn't do. What he means is you be completely faithful to your end of the covenant as your heavenly Father is to his end of the covenant. Okay. So this is a theory that's dragged in from a pagan thinker to be combined with the New Testament. And now we're to think of the God the New Testament talks about as the being with all the perfections. Now, that doesn't mean all the ones we can think of. There might be an infinite number of them, most of which we'll never think of. Whatever they are, God has them. And what's just maybe worse, he has only perfections. Now, this view is kicked off by Augustine. It's ensconced by Anselm a good while later. Augustine died 430. Anselm lived in the 11 or early 1200s. And then Thomas Aquinas is the great commentator who adds detail to this, works it out to a high degree. And then realizing what this requires, Aquinas has a point to make, and he makes in two different works. It means that God has no real relations to you and me, because that's not a perfection. If the only thing true of God is perfections, he says, creatures have real relations to God, but God has no real relation to creatures, which is impossible. If I have a real relation to God, then God has the property of being related to by me. If he doesn't have that, I don't have a real relation to God. And if he does have it, he has a property that's not a perfection. He says, and Aquinas recognizes that that's what follows from this point of view. That undercuts everything in the gospel. And I quote him in this new book, and the next sentence goes, I don't see how any Christian could write those lines and not realize that something had gone horribly wrong with the assumptions that led to them. So I have a lot of respect for Aquinas and his ability. He was a first-class philosopher. He was a theologian. There are lots of things that he writes that are wonderful critiques of non-Christian points of view, defenses of the faith, and clearing up misunderstandings and all sorts of things. But when it comes to the doctrine of God, not a small detail, he gets it all wrong. Got it from Augustine. I could go on with this. There are a lot of other things about that. A lot of people are horrified. You mean you're saying God isn't perfect? Well, not in the Platonic sense. He isn't. No.
I feel like I've been recently have been bumping up against this within my experience as a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
As someone who was kind of obsessed with trying to achieve in music for worship, like get as close as I possibly know how to the transcendental or to this form that I would consider being ideal.
Yeah.
And
by the way, that's what Plato called them too. He called them forms, the perfect forms for what it is to be green or square or human or whatever.
Or song.
Yeah.
Worship song form.
Yeah.
And I was always at tension with the drive and the pursuit of attaining that.
Yeah.
And it would come at the cost of maybe my attitude towards people. You know, and you hear stories about Bach kind of not being a pleasant person. Not that I'm Bach, but there's there's something to, you know, the artist or whoever, the performer wanting to do something well and having something like a guiding telos or aim or goal to help you. But sometimes in the attempt, like, is that attempt holy or is that attempt righteous versus, or at the cost of how you relate to yourself or how you relate to other humans or other Christians or something like that. And I felt like there was I dealt with a lot of tension, and it feels like it's related to this idea that it's attached to this long legacy that you speak of.
Uh-huh.
So.
I think what's helpful there is what Calvin tells us about our calling in life. He says, now you realize through the Middle Ages, the church regarded only clergy as having a calling. You had a calling if you were a monk, a nun, a priest. But the average person who farmed potatoes or raised sheep or whatever, they didn't have a calling.
So that's the priesthood of the believer.
That's right. And Luther and Calvin both saw that that's not what the New Testament has to say at all. Everybody has a calling from God. And so Calvin says, so that our lives are not cast about in confusion all the time, each of us has a calling from God, and it is, as it were, a post assigned them by the Lord in life. And it guides us because whenever we make decisions the first thing that we ask ourselves is, does this advance my calling or detract from my calling? Of course, it could do neither too, but that's the first thing to be considered. And I would add to that that one of the main things that you consider first when arriving at this idea of your calling in life is what gifts you've been given. What abilities do you have? And God calls on us to use those for the advancement of his kingdom. And I think it's a marvelous section. I've read it to most of my grandchildren. I have a few more to get to, but I'm going to read it to all of them. And you assess yourself for gifts and then for opportunities and needs. How does all this fit? And you arrive at a conclusion about your calling, and then it guides you through your life. So I have been, firsthand witness to the fact that some of my children and grandchildren have enormous gifts. One of them asked me early on, do you think I should try? I mean, this field is hugely crowded, and something like 1% of the people that try it ever succeed at the top level. And I said, the worst thing is never to try. Mm. If God gave you the gift, he's going to make the opportunity for you to use it. And I'm talking about my oldest son. He's now principal bassoonist in the Cleveland Orchestra.
Wow.
He made it. And he worked very hard and had to overcome a lot of difficulties to do that, but he did it. And God gave him an enormous gift. He pursued it, and God gave him the opportunity to use it. One of the top orchestras in the country, and he's one of the top bassoonists in the world.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. But it's an example of using that. And that, rather than the notion of perfection, is what's supposed to guide us. We're not called upon to be perfect. We're called upon to develop our talent, whatever that is, and use it to the best of our ability. And that's all that's what God asks of us. Yeah. Not perfection. And another point about that idea that God's all perfections, when we say that, what we're doing is selecting out of our own experience all sorts of characteristics of things and imagining there's a perfect degree of them, right? But the characteristics that we're looking at, whether that's to be a triangle, smooth, green, a horse, a tree, a person, we are told are all created. The perfections in Plato's theory are all self-existent, uncreated, eternal. Mm. And that's why he can say God just is them. You see, but for Augustine, God doesn't have the perfections. He is them. God's the unity of them all.
So what is the contrast then from Luther, Calvin, and then Barth, and from the Orthodox? What's the direct contrast?
The contrast is that first, in Colossians chapter 1, we are told that Christ has created all things visible or invisible, and by his power, they all hang together. Everything visible or invisible. It's the only place in Scripture that uses what we call a tautology in logic. Everything's either visible or it's not. Even God. If Christ is created, God is created through Christ, through his divine nature. Everything visible or invisible, that would include all the qualities like green, blue, square, red, smooth, and everything else that's true of the creation. And one of the great theologians in the Orthodox tradition was St. Basil of Caesarea. And he wrote one time, if there are perfections, God created them. They're not uncreated, eternal perfections, and God's the unity of them all. what's the unity? What's that mean anyway? If you say God's the unity of them all, it means there's really only one perfection, God. And it means that in God, power, knowledge, justice, mercy, love are all the same thing. Do you have any concept of love, power, mercy, justice, and so being the same thing? No, you don't. It's meaningless.
So
The
those are all
Cappadocian Fathers of the Orthodox tradition rejected all that before Augustine wrote it.
where was the disconnect?
Hmm?
Just like an obsession with Plato? Is that the disconnect, or what?
Well, yes, that and the fact that the Cappadocian Fathers wrote in Greek, and Augustine says he tried to learn Greek but could never get the hang of it. I don't know, that meant he couldn't read anything at all, or it just meant I'm not going to tackle a long treatise on theology that's in Greek. But he stuck with Latin, and he endorsed Plato, whereas the Cappadocian Fathers had rejected all of that when Augustine was a boy. Augustine died in 430. The last of the Cappadocians died in 397. And there were Basil, the Bishop of Caesarea, Gregory of Nyssa, his brother-in-law, Gregory Nazianzus, and his sister Macrina, who was the editor for all their works.
That says so much. Even earlier in that conversation, when I was saying like this disconnect, not being able to either communicate easily or even with the language, creating, and that we're coming into a time where, you know, we can work through a lot of that, you know, listen. You could listen to the Cappadocian Fathers. You could probably find audio, you know, Augustine could have listened to them if he couldn't have translated, you know, if they had already been translated.
Right. That's right.
And so
you and I have advantages those guys would have given anything to have.
Yeah, I'm just the implications that we are really in the infancy of.
Yeah.
Is what's interesting. I had a conversation with a very interesting thinker named Jordan Hall, and in his journey into the converting into becoming a Christian, he was a Silicon Valley futurist type guy. Developed some of the first things using MP3s and some of the early video storing technology. One thing he did was use the large language models like ChatGPT to have conversations between the great thinkers. He would set them up to where they were talking to each other, and he could kind of talk to them. Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah,
and
it is.
Of course, it's using only what they've written.
Of course.
Yeah. But that's the best we have of anything from that time or before. So it's that was something that helped him formulate and come to conclusions about, you know, certain parts of, I guess, his Christian creed. And so it's a fascinating time.
Part of, an equally sad part about this debacle, as I see it, is that at the time of the Reformation, Luther and Calvin rediscovered the Orthodox view. I don't know if they got it from them. I tried to find out, and so far I've not been able to find out. But they came up with the same thing. And the Orthodox have again and again recognized that, especially about Calvin. One of the great patriarchs of Constantinople was a man named Cyril Lucaris, and he made a trip to Geneva just to honor John Calvin. He knew Calvin had died long before that, but he went there anyway to honor Calvin. There have been articles in journals since about Calvin and coming up with the Orthodox view of God, which is that that God has created everything that we find in the cosmos. So, unlike the Thomist tradition. I call it the Augustine Anselm Aquinas. So I use the AAA tradition in theology, which sees all of the logical and mathematical truths as uncreated and eternal.
Mm.
But the Cappadocians and the whole tradition in Orthodoxy and then in Calvinism was that they're all created. Now, what happened in Protestantism as a whole is that they followed Luther and Calvin on their call for reforms of the church and church practice, but did not follow them at all on something as fundamental as the doctrine of God. And Protestantism has remained as AAA in its theology as the Catholic Church has ever been. They're totally at one on that. God's the being with all and only perfections, and all the rest.
You would say that's even a caricature of Calvin.
Yeah, a lot of the Calvinist tradition also re-bought into the all and only perfection definition of God, and therefore thought that since the logic consists of eternal uncreated truths, it was okay to use that to prove God's existence. So they lapsed right back into that.
And what was Barth's contribution to trying to
Barth is in that strain of Calvinism that maintained that position that Calvin had held, maintained that view of God. The very being of God, originating being of God itself, is inconceivable and unknowable. But God has made himself known in creation. And Luther used his works, his acts, the things he does in creation to make himself known. Calvin calls it manifestations of God. The Orthodox call it his energies. God's energies descend into creation. They have created characteristics. They are subject to the law of logic and mathematics and so on. That's why we can understand them. And they are God communicating to us. Now, one of the things that I offer as a piece of original work in this book is my answer to the question, how can our language apply to God? If our language is all drawn from creation and everything in it is created, then how can we be talking about the uncreated creator? And my answer is because the uncreated creator has taken created characteristics into himself. And the model for this is the incarnation.
Yeah.
God took the entire created human Jesus Christ into himself so that Jesus becomes the human side of God and God is the divine side of Jesus. But God took created characteristics into himself before the incarnation to make himself known to Israel, to Adam and Eve, and to the entire Jewish tradition.
I've been struggling, and I say this I want to say this with respect because I don't like contention. I don't like conflict.
Yeah.
In my experience of my journey and experience with my relationship to God, my experience with worship, my experience with the doctrines of God or the doctrine of God, is that I guess this Platonic idea yields, it's very friendly to Gnosticism.
Oh, yeah.
And that God is so other, man is so dirty, just like in plain sense, it's not, it's more nuanced when we obviously are talking about what we're talking about with scripture, but
yeah.
And then that almost like you don't really participate in relationship. You're kind of like, it's a lot of it, like a lot of what you do is just constant penance because you're constantly in this struggle to become righteous, even though good Protestants believe in a substitutionary atonement or something.
That's right.
But that we constantly can't live in participation because there's a gap between that relationship still with this Platonic idea.
Yeah.
And
It
I feel like I've lived.
messes up everything. Eventually, it leaks into everything and spoils it. Yeah.
That's been my experience, and that something like a sacramental theology of of course there's sacraments in the Catholic Church and everything and all in
Sure.
top parts of Protestantism, but kind of for me, looking at a sacramental life says something about being able to touch and feel God and participate in my faith and receive grace in a way
That's right.
that is real.
That's right.
Not and
Yeah.
I've been and that so much of what I've been in has been something along the lines of mental assent, that my faith is more or less a belief in my mind.
But it's more than that.
Of course. And
Yeah. It's a disposition from the very heart of human existence. The scripture uses the term heart. It's a metaphor for the deepest seat of our identity, the selfhood of a human. And that's why Jesus says from the heart comes belief, disbelief, blessing, cursing. The issues of life are from the heart, says another scripture. I did a study of those terms when I was a senior in seminary. The terms heart, soul, and spirit, every occurrence in Hebrew and Greek, and looking at the context. And the conclusion I came to is the heart's mostly used for the unity of a person, and spirit for the diversity. This person has a spirit of kindness. This person has a spirit of anger. This person is, you see, and then soul is used by Bible writers almost exactly the reverse of the way we use it in ordinary English. We use it to mean what the Bible writers mean by heart, but soul for Bible writers means the embodiment of all of the soul, of the heart and the spirit, the body in which this is, of which the heart is the unity, and the spirit is the diversity, but it's a living body. And in fact, in the Hebrew Old Testament, when they sacrifice an animal, they did it by cutting an artery, so it was painless as possible. And the Hebrew says the soul poured out in the ground. That means it's life. So soul means something that is living. It's not an immortal part of you other than your biotic life. It is your biotic life. That's what your soul and spirit are. Your heart and soul are and spirit are expressed through. So it's not a body as an evil appendage that you have to think is everything about it's terrible.
So that would be the dualism.
Yeah, that's the Gnosticism. You mentioned at the outset too that this doctrine of God was somehow connected to the best argument for atheism. If I can just briefly mention what that is for your viewers, even if we don't have time to cover it.
We're good.
The idea that God is all perfections means, and you have to think about this, God doesn't have free will. You and I may, but God doesn't. God's compelled to do what he does by whatever is the most perfect thing to do. He can't do anything else. God has no real choices. If his nature is supremely perfect, he can't change, because the only way he could change would be to become less than perfect. And he has no real choice, because his perfect nature compels him to do the most perfect thing, the best thing that could be done. Now, a writer caught on to this, a pagan writer, whose pen name was Porphyry. We don't know his real name. Porphyry is something he made jewelry out of. And he wrote a book somewhere around the year 250 called Against the Christians. And this is the argument that he gave. If God has all the perfections, then he has perfect justice, right? He knows everything.
Omniscient,
he's all powerful.
yeah, omnipresent.
Yeah. Okay. But the trouble with that is there's undeserved suffering in the world. Now, if there's undeserved suffering, a perfectly good God would want to stop it. An all-powerful God could. So if there's a God that's all-powerful and all-knowing and all-good, there couldn't be undeserved suffering in the world. So there's no such being as God, because there is undeserved suffering. And if you try to make arguments that all humans are partly evil and maybe they all deserve what they get, I mean, that's not our experience, is it? Our experience is that sometimes the worst offenders prosper and live high on the hog, and the most pious souls are poor and oppressed. But even aside from God, that, animals suffer. And they couldn't have done anything morally wrong. They're not moral beings. So the fawn that gets its hoof caught in a log and burns alive in a forest fire could have been prevented by God, but it wasn't. So there is undeserved suffering. Now, of course, in the Hindu and Buddhist traditions, that's said to be only illusion. There is no undeserved suffering, because there's no real suffering, if you can believe that one. I mean, I think we've all suffered enough that we don't believe that. But anyway, that's the argument. That's the best argument against belief in God. And it comes directly out of viewing God as the being with all and only perfections. If that's not God, if God has created the world as we find it, if God has created a world in which nature is red in tooth and claw, to quote Tennyson, and the Psalms affirm that, don't they? The young lions do roar and have their food from the Lord. That's what he made. You don't like that because you could be the food, but that's the way God made the world. He didn't make it according as close to Platonic perfections. And I have an argument as to why there are no such things in the book. Anyway, this is why that turns out to be the best argument against God, against belief in God, and why also it doesn't work if you throw out that perfections doctrine and you go by Scripture instead. And Scripture doesn't describe God that way. An all-perfect being couldn't order Abraham to murder his son.
That's right.
I mean, it's no answer to say, oh, he didn't let him go through with it. No. If you're perfectly perfect, you can't order it. In 2 Thessalonians, there's a comment that in the last days, the people who are opposing the church and the gospel, God will send a strong delusion so that they will believe a lie. You and I would call that dishonesty. If I fool somebody so that they deliberately believe something that's false, I'm a deceiver. That's what 2 Thessalonians says is true of God. He's going to do that because he isn't bound by those laws. He created them to bind creatures and creation. And he's bound by the ones he has promised to be bound by. In other words, we can hold God accountable for anything he promised in the covenants he's made us. We do not have the right to hold God to any standard that he didn't promise to abide by himself.
And so the new atheists type argument is holding God to Plato.
Yeah, you can't blame them. I mean, that's been the prevailing view in the Western Church of who God is.
Yeah,
yeah. And I find that the discussions today in religious studies, in philosophy of religion, just virtually completely ignore the Orthodox view, and they think that the strain of Calvinism that preserved Calvin's own doctrine, which was the same as the Orthodox, is just some they're a bunch of weirdos because they think God created logic and math. And that means that and they think that means that God can make 5-sided triangles or make 2 and 2 7.5, and so on. And I take up those arguments in the book too.
So to help me clarify, what is the other argument for the doctrine of God from the Orthodox and
God has eternally taken on characteristics that he promises he will never relinquish. And he describes himself in those terms in his manifestations by his prophets and by incarnating himself in Jesus Christ. He makes that known. That's not a mask over what he really is. That is what he really is, because there is nothing else that you could call a nature that God has. That's his nature. Calvin refers to it in the Institutes as the nature in which God is pleased to manifest himself. It's his choice. And he chose to be kind and forgiving and create an atonement for humans and rescue them from their condition of sin and ignorance and evil. Not to condemn them. That's why John says he didn't send his son to condemn the world, but that the whole world may be saved through him.
And is that part of theosis?
No, theosis is part of that. Theosis is the process of what a lot of Protestants call sanctification, becoming more Christ-like in our life. And Peter refers to it as sharing the nature of Christ. That is, as Christ was a perfect human being with loving God with all his heart, soul, and mind, and his neighbor as himself, we strive in this life to become more and more like that, if we can. We try our best, and that will be given to us as a gift. We shall be in glory like him, for we shall see him as he is. Yeah.
So problem number 2 is something like hell and judgment for the critique.
Yeah, you mean the corrections I offered? Yeah.
Stumbling block for many seeking the Christian God.
Yeah.
Is the divine human destiny versus the annihilation of man.
Okay. Yeah. On the atheist view, the end of the human race is to be annihilated in the heat death of the universe, and it will be as though no one ever lived. No one ever did anything.
Sounds like a familiar story.
Right. There's a wonderful quote I have in there from Bertrand Russell about all the accomplishments, the brilliant glory like the noonday sun will all disappear as though it never existed. That's the atheist point of view.
Yeah.
But the Christian point of view, and here I have to go back to Augustine again and pick on him. The Christian point of view is not that some will go to be in God's everlasting kingdom and live with Christ and become ever more like him and so on. And others will go to hell and be tortured forever. That idea is not found in the scripture. And that's a lot of people are shocked and surprised to hear me say that. But the fact is that all the translations I've seen of the New Testament in English translated as though it does say that. In Matthew, for example, Jesus says, "Away into eternal punishment, you evildoers," and stuff like that. And that's not what the Greek says. But Augustine insisted the Greek should be translated the way he wanted it. Didn't matter what the word was and what it meant. He said it should mean eternal, because that fit with his theology. If it means eternal life, when it says you're redeemed to life, it's got to mean eternal death in order to be symmetrical or balanced.
Or perfect.
Yeah. Never mind what the text actually says. So a lot depends on the word that is used there. And the word that is used is the Greek word aion. And that word means a period of time. It's an indefinite period, but it's a period of time that has a beginning and has an end. And that's what the expression is when it says eternal life. It's translated that way. It's life of the age. It's an age. The Jews of the first century, a century before Christ and after, and so on, for a good spread of that time, thought of history as divided into ages. There's the age of the prophets, the patriarchs, the prophets, and there's going to be an age of the Messiah. That's why Jesus' disciples say to him, "Are you about to usher in the new age?" That's the term. It's not world. It's sometimes translated that way, and it's sometimes translated eternity. That's not what it says either. It's an age of time, a period of time that has a beginning and has an end. And we know that because that term was used in the Greek translation of the Old Testament for Jews by the 70 rabbis that took place in the 3rd century before Christ. They translated the whole Testament into Greek because that was the common language everywhere in the ancient world. Even though the Romans conquered everybody, the language of everyday business was still Greek.
Was that the Septuagint?
Yes, that's the Septuagint. That's named for 70 because the tradition says 70 rabbis collaborated in making it. And they used the word ion in the way I've described. It's a period of time, an age, but it could be long or short. But they used it for things that they knew had already come to an end. And the New Testament writers pick up ion and use it. They picked it up from the usage in the Septuagint. And so they talk about the age to come. So what Christ really says to those wicked people is, away from me, you workers of wickedness, to the punishment of the age, of the time. It doesn't tell us when that ends and so on. But it always is spoken of as a period of time that has an end. I'm not saying there's no day of judgment. I'm not saying nobody is sentenced by the divine court on the day of judgment. We will all give account of ourselves before God, Paul says. That's right. But whatever the sentences are, they are not described as eternal torture. That's not true. And neither are they described as eternal. In fact, there's a text in the book of Revelation that says that at the end, when Christ turns the kingdom over to God the Father, every knee will bow and every tongue confess that Jesus is Lord of the glory of God the Father. Now, Paul says in 1 Corinthians, make no mistake, nobody confesses that Jesus is Lord except by the Spirit. They're given the gift of the Holy Spirit. They see the truth. They confess that Christ is Lord. The Revelation says that's going to be true of everybody. Every knee. It says in heaven, earth, and under the earth. So means to include everyone. So I don't go into arguments about this. I don't say, would this be something of good God could do and all that. That actually begs the question. I just look at the texts in the New Testament and I assemble something like 27 of them that say one after another that everyone will be in the kingdom of God.
So as we're leaning into the use of the biblical corpus, to use a Jordan Petersonism, is one of the questions in kind of this online community that I participate in here on YouTube that we've been bouncing back and forth with a young man who's proposing something called meta religion, and are we playing around with something called meta Christianity, where you can do, where people are maybe psychologically toggling between different frames of in different age, different kind of time periods that we would say something like modernism, medieval modernism, postmodernism, frames of looking at scripture. And I think some people might be interested in maybe your perspective on something like historical criticism and scripture and with authority related to something like apologetics?
Okay, that's actually a mixed bag, and I'll try to hit the mixture. In the first place, you could use the term meta religion for theology. We have a collection of writings that have preserved the covenants God has made through history. The first covenant he made with Adam and Eve, I think, after they disobeyed. I'm not sure his first dealings with them were redemptive, but didn't follow precisely the covenant form. When they disobeyed and had to be booted out of the garden of God's special protection and fellowship, then God established covenants to restore that. And he made covenants then with Noah and with Abraham and then with Israel and through Moses, so on. That's the religion. That's the record. Now, how one pieces together doctrines out of that is called theology. Now I take this and this and this, and I assemble them in a certain way. I see them as related in a certain way, and I come up with a system of doctrine. And I love what C.S. Lewis had to say about that. He said, look, the gospel is the story that Jesus came, wiped out our sins, made us right with God. Now, anything more than that is theology. And that's our construction. We're doing that. There's more than one way to construct the theology. The writings will bear that. They can be taken in more than one way. And if the theology helps you, wonderful. If it doesn't, forget it. Far from burning people at the stake for disagreeing with how I piece things together in my theology, this says it's there to help you. That's the Orthodox, and that's always been the Orthodox view of theology. It may be good, it can be good and helpful. There's also a risk. You can get things wrong. It's a human enterprise. And you certainly aren't condemning people for disagreeing with somebody's theology.
So that's interesting that it seems like, from what you're telling me, that where we place something like theology or history on some kind of meta view of the whole thing, where we place it in the priority stack should be maybe it's been in too primacy of a position, too much in a position of primacy versus other things.
Yeah, that's right. Meta in Greek means after. So this is another level. Okay, we have the scripture here. We now pull things apart and put them back together. And it's like assembling a jigsaw puzzle, but you don't have the picture on the box. You're coming up with what the picture should be.
Mm.
And you get a picture and somebody else gets slightly different picture, and somebody else a slightly different one. That's perfectly legitimate. That's perfectly possible. And whatever, if it helps you in your Christian life and your relationship with God, wonderful. If it doesn't, forget it. That's what Lewis said. I think that's great.
Yeah, that is moving.
Tell you too. They have always taken that attitude about theology. It's there to help you in your private relationship with God, in your everyday relationship. If it doesn't help, don't even bother with it.
What I guess my point on that is that's also moving past or through a postmodern perspective of, oh, you've got a picture and I've got a picture, and since they're different, then they're meaningless.
Yeah, postmodernism has largely taken over what was called in the 20th century pragmatism. Pragmatism is a theory of knowledge. It's an epistemology. It's a theory that says, you think you're looking for the truth all the time? No. We can never get that. Nobody really knows what's true independently of themselves. We adopt different beliefs because they work for us. So William James wrote, "The truth is the cash value of a belief. It's what you do with it. It's how it affects you. Does it make you feel better? Believe it. If it doesn't make you feel better, throw it out." He says, he actually uses belief in God as an example. He says, if one man is a better husband, better father, better citizen because he believes in God, then that's his truth. If another man is a better husband, father, citizen because he's an atheist, then that's his truth. This has nothing to do with corresponding to reality. It has to do only with our own internal state of mind. And that's what we had in the 20th century was a big separation of philosophy into the side that went more toward the logical positivists, that went with science and logic and math and precision, and the other side, which was largely in Europe, was existentialism. It's concerned with people, their free will, their decisions, and their destiny, and so on. And they seem to not even be able to talk to each other by mid-century. Now that's largely collapsed because both sides are becoming pragmatic. So I have an addendum in this in the new book. I've tried to keep the technical points to the notes so they don't bother the average reader. And I have two appendices. And one appendix says, can pragmatism save naturalism? Naturalism is atheism. It's the belief that there's only nature. And I have a critique of that and show why it doesn't work.
Why pragmatism can't save it?
It can't work. It has no pragmatic value, and it contradicts itself, and so on. I take there as the spokesperson, representative for pragmatism, the man who was probably the most prominent pragmatist of the late 20th into the early 21st century, Richard Rorty, who actually he was a professor in one of the outstanding philosophy departments in the country in Princeton, and he resigned his position when he came to the conclusion that there was no truth. And the University of Virginia hired him in something like cultural studies or some term like that. And he wrote a number of books, and I choose one of them. It's rather early, so it's dated now, but it beautifully sets out his agenda. It's called The Consequences of Pragmatism, and I have an analysis of that in this appendix.
So in chapter 5, it's entitled The Meaning of Faith in the New Testament of your upcoming book.
Yes.
So I think pistis, is that the Greek faith?
Yes.
So could you unpack what is the meaning of faith a little bit?
Okay. What I argue there is that if we pay attention to the text and analyze the way it's using the term, we'll find that it's used in three senses, two of which were brand new to the Greek language. It uses the term to mean opinion when you don't know for sure. And that's familiar with that. We use it that way too. I didn't see the accident, but I have faith that so-and-so reported it accurately to me. She wouldn't lie to me. Okay, that's pistis. That's okay. But it's used then in two other ways as well. Now that first way, it doesn't occur very often in the New Testament. I'm not sure. I'd have to check it. It may not occur more than once or twice. But the other two are widely used. Now, one of the uses is for the Christian religion as a whole. Okay, Paul talks about the faith once delivered to the saints. He's talking about all the revelation, all the story about Christ coming to as our Redeemer, his death, his resurrection, so on, right? The faith once delivered to the saints. And he uses it a couple times that way, that broad and all-inclusive, that had never been used that way in Greek before for a whole religious tradition. And secondly, it's used for the act of seeing that the gospel is the truth. That's called pistis as well. And that's described as an intuitive seeing of the truth. And in Ephesians 1, Paul talks about that as seeing the truth with the eyes of your heart. It couldn't be a better description. Now, in philosophy, that's been recognized for a long time. There's no proof of axioms, you just see them. There are a whole lot of things there's no proof of, but we necessarily believe and use all day, every day. That kind of knowledge had been called in the ancient world enlightenment, the same term the Old Testament uses for seeing the truth about God. But after the Renaissance, when we got into the period that's called enlightenment, which is a misnomer in many respects, but anyway, the Descartes and Locke wanted a new term for seeing intuitively that something is true without proof. Okay, and the term they came up with and used was self-evident. Locke says it's a truth that carries its own evidence with it. So if I'm suppose I'm talking about 1 + 1 makes 2, or things equal to the same thing are equal to each other, there's no proof of them. Use them to prove other things. But it's obviously true. So the two characteristics of a self-evident truth is it's not inferred from other information. So it's not proven. There's no other information that yields this truth. It's not why other information is not why you believe it. You believe it because it's prima facie true. It just looks irresistibly right. Okay. And I'm saying that when you look at the way, especially John and Paul, but other writers, the author, whoever wrote Hebrews too, they use the term faith this way. John, I cite those texts and show at some length how they're used, what they mean. And it does not just mean the first thing. It does not mean an opinion that may or may not be right. And I don't know for certain, but I'm going to accept it. That's what it does not mean when it refers to belief in God.
And that's
So
the argument that was put forth and within something like New Atheism was blind faith is the only form of Christian faith or something.
Yeah.
Or that's what all of religion is.
Right. And so what we have when we have different religions that have different divinities, right? The divine is whatever it is. It's a divinity. I'll start again. A divinity belief is a belief in something as the self-existent reality that generates everything else. Whatever that is plays the role of divinity in that view. So it could be matter and energy. It could be the laws of logic and mathematics. It could be God. It could be Brahmanatman. It could be the Tao in Taoism. It could be, you understand? It's a role played by by a belief within any system of what it is. What is the ultimate reality that is just there? It doesn't depend on anything. It didn't come into being. It can't go out of existence. It's just has self-existence. I think logically, the cleanest way to put it is that it's unconditionally non-dependent. Self-existent is a sort of shortcut for that. Okay, whatever you put in that slot's your divinity belief. And that's what's divine to you. And the Christian says that's God. And the materialist says that it's, I don't know, some purely physical something at the quantum level. And the Taoist says it's the Tao, and the Hindu says it's Brahmanatman, and ancient Egyptian said it's Amun-Ra. People put different candidates in that. This is why one of the reasons for my conclusion that none of the proofs of God work. When Thomas proves something's got to be the first cause, something's got to be unconditional and not contingent, right? Everything else can come into being and pass away, but there's got to be something that can't come into being or pass away. And he goes on and on, something. And then he writes at the bottom, and this we say is God. Oh, yeah? Well, this materialist says is something matter. And this, the Hindu says, is Brahmanatman. You can say it all you want, but that's not a proof. You can't get from there's this role to God's the one that fulfills the role, plays that role. God's the creator of everything other than himself. And you can put any number of other things in that. And that, what goes in that role, that a person knows from their own experience. Something just looks like it belongs there. I heard a materialist lecture at Penn one time, and he said it was a theory of language, and he was concluding his lecture. Now, you might ask me, he said, does my theory assume idealism or materialism? And he said, it seems to me you could adapt it either way. If you ask me what I am, I'm a materialist. Then he went on kind of talking to himself. He said, if you ask me why, I'm not sure what I'd say. It's not because of the arguments. I guess I'd just have to say, reality looks irresistibly physical to me. That's exactly what I'm talking about. That's what happens to someone who encounters the gospel. Okay? So what we have with these different divinity beliefs is a case of head-butting intuition.
Mm.
Okay, so at the end of the book, I do not leave it as a conflict of head-butting intuitions. I say there's a way to decide between them.
Okay.
Okay. And you're if we haven't put your readers to sleep yet.
I don't think so.
I can tell you just how that goes, and then
Well, we got just under 10 minutes.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay. What I noticed about intuitions of self-evidence, and I include normal sense perception as the greatest example, right? All day long, every day, we see things that we take to be real, right? Because we see them, taste them, touch them, smell them. We accept normal sense perception as showing us the world the way it is. Not everything about it, but the way it is. And we can be mistaken about it too. And we can be fooled. There are hallucinations and
optical illusions.
Illusions, and yeah. Okay. But for the most part, our normal sense perception is reliably self-evident, cases of self-evidence. But what I noticed about this is something I haven't found anybody else point out. And that is that when we experience something to be self-evidently true, we nevertheless test it. This is true of, I'm talking about everywhere, everybody, all day, every day. I come to a stop sign, I look left, I look right, nothing's coming, but before I pull out, I look left again. Right? Just to make sure. Okay. I test sense perceptions. We test memory beliefs against other people's recollections, written records, photographs. We test axioms for consistency with other axioms. We test, and I call them intuitions of reflection, such as divinity beliefs or that other people have minds. There's no proof that the other people you encounter have minds just like yours. We all just naturally believe that because we would say it's self-evident to us. It's notoriously unprovable. People have tried to give arguments that conclude other people have minds that work like ours, and they can't do it. They all admit that the attempts to prove it have failed. So we make tests. Now, my argument is that belief, now, there are all kinds of tests. Okay, I just named some, but here are some more for the intuitions of reflection that includes divinity beliefs. Does it lead us to expect other things that we then find are true in our experience? Does it contribute to our overall grasp of reality? Does it make a distinctive contribution to our grasp of specific areas of that experience? Ethics, the law, social relations with other people, business, whatever it might be. And I name quite a number of others. And I go on to show that belief in God has tons of these confirming experiences. We don't derive the self-evident truth from them, but they confirm it by being what we'd expect, by aiding us in these different ways. We're adding organization, making sense of everything. All right. And then I contrast that to materialism, to the atheists. The best accounts the atheists can give us right now to compete with a Christian view or any other view are materialism and dualism. And both talk about the purely physical. That's the divine, whatever it turns out to be. We don't know which things they are, which complexes or particles or fields or what, we don't know. But whatever it is, it's purely physical. Okay, that's the materialist view. The materialist view yields no confirming beliefs or instances. It can't be tested at all. And I close the book with that argument. It's an experiment in thought in which we try to conceive of something as purely physical. And I show why it can't be done. You can't think of anything as purely physical.
Because there's like a natural intuition of spirit?
No, it's because of trying to take our concept of anything, whatever. I ask the reader to use the piece of paper on which he or she is reading the words. Now, take that piece of paper. Let's try to think of it as purely physical. It has physical characteristics, right? It has a certain tensile strength. It has weight. It has specific gravity, right? Okay. It has physical properties. But the claim is it has only physical properties. That's the materialist claim. It really is only physical. For a materialist, everything is purely physical or caused by the purely physical.
Does that touch on something along the lines of the theory of information?
Well, theory of information is affected. If you're a materialist, there are a lot of views you can't permit and only a small range that you can. But they're not identical. If you try to conceive of that piece of paper as purely physical, you're going to have to one by one eliminate the non-physical characteristics it seems to have. And once we get down that list and get rid of all the other characteristics, what's left is not a purely physical residue. What's left is zilch, nothing, nada, no concept at all.
So we just took a little break. We're back now to kind of round out this. We were pushing my limit on a recording, so there were kind of two pieces to kind of tie up where we were at. Which I guess, as we were talking backstage just now, you kind of neatly tied up this idea, which was part of your very first work, the myth of religious neutrality. Because you were talking about the different divine ideas or different divine principles.
Divinity, yeah.
Yes, divinity, and how it's not neutral. And you were just kind of explaining to me why that is.
Yeah, I was just trying to clarify the claim since it sounds so odd. First of all, religious belief is too vague. It does say on the cover the hidden role of religious beliefs and theories. That doesn't mean the role of belief in baptism or circumcision or holy days or something like that. It only means divinity beliefs. And by divinity, I mean the self-existent reality that generates everything else. Now, I had given an argument, a very brief argument at the beginning of this new book as to why we know there is such a thing. Something has to be divine because if you consider the sum total of reality, the sum total of reality can't depend on anything else because there isn't anything else. It's the sum total of all that's real, and there's nothing else for it to depend on. So it has to be self-existent in part or whole. Now, there are three major religious traditions that say it's the whole, no part. Nothing we experience is divine, but there's a divine reality that all these non-divine things are made of. And those are Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism. The whole is Brahmanatman in Hinduism. It has a number of names in Buddhism, Dharmakaya, Sachnas, so on, and the Tao. Then there are three major religious traditions that say, no, it's one part of reality, the total of reality. It's the part that has generated all the rest, and that is God. And those three are Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Then there's also the tradition that says, no, it's just the natural universe. Some part of that is the divine that generates the rest of it. It's nothing supernatural outside the realm of nature. And that in philosophy, that's called naturalism. And in the rest of the world, it's called atheism. Okay. So that's the lay of the land as far as religious belief is concerned. And what I was arguing in that first book is that it's not possible to make an abstract theory in any science or in philosophy that doesn't presuppose some divinity belief. That is, not that the proposals made in the theories are what they are because of the divinity belief, but a proposal would be something like there are things called neutrons, or there's the Higgs boson, or there was a process of evolution, or there was, all kinds of things that we propose. It's not that the proposals differ relative to the religious belief by the religious belief forcing a person to make different proposals. They can all make they can all agree there's a neutron. But what the religious belief of a thinker does is compel them to attribute a distinctive nature to anything they propose. So if somebody holds to the divinity belief of materialism, they are not going to propose a non-physical something to explain. Whatever proposals they make, they're going to say the nature of this thing is to be purely physical or caused by the purely physical. Similarly, if they put something else in that divinity belief slot, they're going to attribute that kind of nature to any proposals they make. And what Dooyeweerd was saying, and that I thought was right, and I wrote my dissertation on, was that if you put God in the role, the biblical God, in the role of being the divine reality that generates all the rest, it gives you a very distinctive take on proposals that you make in any theory, in any field whatsoever. That's the claim. And I try to show what that difference is. There are chapters on the major theories in mathematics, physics, and psychology as examples of divinity beliefs controlling the nature of theoretical proposals. Then I say, what would a theory of reality look like if it presupposed God? And there I give an introduction to the brilliant theory of reality that Dooyeweerd worked out. That's the first book.
Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
We're always
not a bestseller, right?
So help my simplistic understanding is that we are always going to presuppose something like God at the forefront behind everything, behind every idea.
Yes, there's some idea of what the ultimate reality is like, and that influences the nature of the postulates we make, the proposals we make in our theories in every field whatsoever.
And I had a conversation with somebody going back. Well, I was listening to a conversation. It was a guy named Sam Tiedemann, and he kind of plays in this corner, and he was talking about scientific studies, sociological studies that are having to realize that we actually need to take into account not just the study being done, but the person doing the study is a factor within the study always.
How can that be false?
But that we haven't been doing science that way.
Well, I'm not so sure.
Or
it's been widely recognized among scientists that individual personality bents or even quirks can figure in helping somebody discover something. There's a famous story about Kekule, the guy that discovered the structure of the benzene molecule. He was trying to work it out. He had a model molecule, and he was trying to make it work, and nothing was working. He fell asleep, and in his dream, he saw the model molecule. It turned into a snake, and the snake turned around and bit its tail. So he woke up and said, well, that's it. And he bent the thing around so that it connected to itself again, and there was the structure of the benzene molecule. I can't swear that story is true, but it's widely accepted, and I think he endorsed it himself. But
that's
an example.
That has a lot of interesting symbolic implications.
Yeah, sure.
Well,
I mean, but nobody is saying, even if that turns out not to be a true story, nobody's saying that's impossible. It could happen. So, but
well,
again, I mean, what people see, Archimedes getting into the bathtub and watching the water rise, and oh, there's the solution. It takes a brilliant mind to see that that's the solution. You and I just see the water rise.
He saw displacement.
Yeah, he saw displacement.
So I did my 4th grade science project on displacement. That's the only reason.
Yeah.
So to tie this thing up, towards the end of your recent book, that your forthcoming book, Can We Know God is Real? You have a chapter about Genesis, and I think there's just something really interesting about in the culture that I've experienced related to the reality of God. I mean, maybe it shouldn't be interesting because this is where all things come to be in this story from God, but that has been probably one of the biggest reasons why a lot of peers in my life, maybe a little older too, walked away from a Christian faith was because of Genesis and a type of fundamentalist literal reading of it, and that the atheists attacked. And then recently in the culture, somebody like Jordan Peterson started to look at Genesis from a psychological perspective, and it actually played a large role in a certain contingency of people moving into a practice and belief of God again. And so the fact that you brought it in, I wanted to get why you see it as an important part of this whole conversation.
Okay. It's important because what I'm doing in the book is contrasting Christianity with atheism. I don't contrast it with other religions. I mean, that's a 10-volume set, but I contrast it with atheism. I think that's more likely what people are confronted with in our society today. You believe in God or not? They don't first ask, are you a Jew, a Christian, or a Muslim? They all believe in God, and I think that's crazy, something like that. And the atheists are attacking Genesis by endorsing the fundamentalist misunderstanding and saying, no, they have it right. It's really that stupid. And so forget the whole thing. So I thought, before we go ahead to contrast the atheist point of view with the Christian, which is what happens after this chapter on Genesis, we'll get this out of the way. It's like the 500-pound gorilla sitting in the room. you don't want to just leave it sitting there. You got to do something with it. And it's also something that I've thought about a good bit and read a fair amount about. And as I said in our earlier interview, I had 3 years of Hebrew in seminary. It doesn't make me an expert, but it makes me somebody that can at least check the commentaries in the original and the blah, blah, blah. So I wanted to do that. I also did something else. I checked the rabbinical commentaries, and I have a bone to pick with my fellow Christian interpreters as to why they're not doing that. That seems stupid to me. The rabbinical tradition has dealt with this stuff for a lot longer than we have. They've come up with recognizing certain pitfalls to be avoided and certain other very promising lines of interpretation. And I found one of them in particular to be a great help. And I think it's ridiculous for the Christians to ignore that. And I checked with a friend of mine who's also a philosophy professor. He's still teaching. I'm retired, but he's an expert on Augustine. I said, did Augustine ever consult any of the rabbis, any of the rabbinical commentaries, as far as you know? And he said, never. So it's one more bad mark on Augustine. And his interpretation of Genesis is, I think, terrible. It's a great disservice to the Christian tradition. And it's what everybody has in mind. When they go to read Genesis, they read in what Augustine said it meant. They don't read out what's on the page. Example, Augustine took it that Adam and Eve had to be the first human beings. Genesis doesn't say that. It not only doesn't say that, it says that when Cain, their Adam and Eve's oldest son, is exiled for having murdered his brother, he goes and settles with a whole bunch of other people and founds a city. Does that sound like there were only 3 people on the planet? No, of course not. It also says that Adam and Eve's children worked in specific areas. One was a farmer and one was a shepherd. And we know when farming arose and when shepherding arose. And it's roughly 10,000, 11, 12,000, somewhere in there, years ago. There have been humans on this planet a lot longer than that. We have discovered what surely looked like altars that have been dated at 40,000 years. So these presumptions that come from Augustine that infect everybody's reading are powerful, hard to get rid of, and very detrimental to getting the meaning of the text. Let me make one more point before I go on. The chapter and verse divisions that we have of Scripture are not in any of the original documents. I hope your viewers know that. The chapter and verse divisions that we widely use were put there by an Archbishop of Canterbury named Stephen Langton, who lived in the 1200s. He was on a long, boring trip, and he thought that to dispel the boredom, as he rode on horseback, he'd divide the Bible up into chapters and verses.
So and every time there was a bump, you got a chapter, right?
Yeah, that's it. So you get whatever he came up with. Now, the Jews also didn't have chapter and verse divisions, but they had readings for the temple, for the synagogue. And the readings were sections that started at a place and then ended at what seemed to be the proper end of the subject they were reading about. And their divisions of early Genesis are very different from ours. And I think they got it right. So what we start off with in Genesis is creation. We get the story, in the beginning, God created everything. The Jews, ancient Jews, didn't have a term for the universe or something like that. They didn't even have what the Greeks had, cosmos. For them, everything is heavens and the earth. If you say the heavens and the earth, that's everything. God created it all. And then you get a story about God creating in days of the week. Now, the first thing that you can't miss about this is that it has to be anthropomorphic about God, because God doesn't have a vocal cords, a lungs, a lips, and a tongue. And there is no atmosphere, right? He's going to create it. God says, let there be light. All right, so it's anthropomorphic. It's thinking of God as though he were a human, but well knowing that he's not, because he's going to create humans later on. Then it sets this up in an imaginary way, imagining God creating everything. And I'm not the first to point this out, but the first 3 days that are mention God separating light from darkness, the atmosphere from the rest of reality, and land from sea. Okay. The second 3 days, he creates the sun, moon, and stars, birds and sea life, and the third day, plants and animals and humans. I mean, sixth day. So 1, 2, 3 correspond exactly with 4, 5, and 6. 1, 2, 3 give us the background conditions for 4, 5, and 6. So Augustine himself even wonders, well, if these are literal days, they couldn't be that, because the sun, moon, and stars aren't created the fourth day. There are no days. All right. But what he missed was the correspondence between 1, 2, 3 and 4, 5, 6. That alone tells you these are not literal days. This is not a literal description of what you would have seen if you had been there, and so on and so on. What's happening here is that the main focus is on God's purposes. God wants light and dark, atmosphere and ocean, sea and land, and he wants to fill these with creatures. So when it says early on, and the earth was without form and void, that's the way it's usually translated in English. That term void is still used for a desert in Israel. Devoid of life. It's messed up and devoid of life. And now God brings order into it in the last 3 days and creates life forms. Now, why did the author choose a week? And I think the answer to that's all too obvious. This is Genesis is part of the covenant with Moses. It's not a standalone essay. It wasn't found under a rock and then added. It was always connected to the rest of the Torah. It's therefore God's purposes. And God's purposes are on display here. That's why you go from the general conditions to the specific fulfillments, and everything is what as God wants it to be. God creates. He's not limited by the material he has to work with, because he creates the material. There's no pre-existent material. God creates ex nihilo, is the Latin expression, out of nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Why is it put in the form of a week? Because the author is then going to say, God worked in a week. He did all his work in 6 days. That's what you're going to do too. The law of Moses is going to command its followers to keep the Sabbath day holy and not work on it. It's a day of rest. God worked in 6 days and they kept the seventh for rest. You're going to do the same thing. I see that as the reason for expressing purpose in a temporal week. So do the days mean days of a week? Yes. Are they symbolic of something else? Yes. There's no reason why they can't be literal days and symbols for something else. Everything that's a symbol for something else is a literal something. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive. One is a necessity for the other. You can't get a symbol unless you have something that isn't one. Okay, So how do you divide up the text as you read it? God says he creates everything. He orders it the way he wants. He makes all the life forms, including humans. He creates them male and female in his image. End. Now, the trouble is that if you end the chapter where the Jews stop their reading, it comes before chapter 2. And the early chapter 2 is a different topic. It's not creation. It's not a second creation story. Augustine took it that way, and a lot of Bibles are printed with the headline, Second Creation Story. That's not in the text. Somebody made that up. And the second reading is not about creation. And the key text there is Genesis 2:7. In most of the English translations I've seen, it reads like this. And the Lord God created man of the dust of the earth and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and he became a living soul. And that's what they think is a second creation story. Now, if it were, what we'd expect to find is God created humans and breathed into them, and then we would expect to find the word for breath or spirit, that's ruach in Hebrew, or the word soul, that's the life of the body, that's nephesh in Hebrew, but it's neither one. The term that's used there is neshama, and that's the term used for God giving his spirit to some prophet or someone who becomes his spokesman. So this is not God making a mud mannequin alive, so like Pinocchio, it hops up and runs around and becomes a real boy, you know. It's not that. It's God giving his spirit to Adam and redeeming him from death. That's what the topic is. The topic shifts from creation to redemption, and that's what the rest of the book is about. Redemption. About God coming in, reaching into his creation to rescue his lost creatures. And he first wants to redeem them from death. And when they violate that by sin, then redemption has to include redemption from death, from sin, and then from death.
And we know at least kind of how that continues to play out.
Sure.
And I think we believe that it's continuing to play out.
Yes.
And
yes.
that's some pretty good news.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. That's why Paul says, in Adam all died. He didn't say there was never death beforehand, but Adam returned to being mortal. He gave up his redemption from death by disobeying. So death returns as a curse.
Well,
there's a passage in Romans, it's chapter 5, where Paul says that Adam sinned against God by breaking his law. And he says, where there's no law, there's no sin. And then he adds, still speaking about Adam, of course, sin was already in the world, but there was no law. So God didn't hold it against anybody. Who are those people? Who was it that sinned but did what we would call sin, but God hadn't given a law yet, so it's not held against them?
I have some ideas.
Well, there had to be people. He's talking about people before Adam and contemporary with Adam. And when the law comes, then you are held responsible. And it's Paul who, in two different speeches that he gives in the book of Acts, says, in times past, God overlooked human sin, but now calls everyone to repent. Now, when in biblical history did God overlook sin? Nowhere. He held Adam responsible for his. He held Noah responsible for his. He held Abraham. He held Moses. He held the people of Israel. Of course, because there had been a law all along. God had revealed himself and made demands and promises. But the people before Adam and Eve aren't the first humans. They're the first humans to receive redemption. This is the beginning of redemption. The beginning of the book is with creation. God creates everything. Now God also is going to be Redeemer. He cares about people. He offers them redemption from death. God created humans of the dust of the ground. The dust of the ground is an expression that always refers to mortality. It means they die. If you're of the dust of the ground, that's your major characteristics is you're going to die. Okay. So God created humans mortal and now gave them neshama, his spirit. And Adam became a redeemed from death soul. That's what that passage means. And everything after it is about redemption. In fact, everything about the rest of the Torah, the Psalms, the prophets, the writings, the New Testament is about redemption. It's a book of redemption. It's a book about how to live in right relation to God. And to take that book and try to turn it into an encyclopedia where you look up all your science is as gross a perversion as I can imagine.
Well, Dr. Clouser, closing with some strong words there and some words that I appreciate. So thank you so much for giving me this time and the people listening, and I hope people will look into your work. Is there a place where people can find your work?
I have a website. I think they can find. Other people have told me they looked something up on Google and it listed my works and stuff.
Okay.
I didn't even know that was on there, but that's what they can find.
What's your website? Something or another.
You're asking me for the address. I don't know it offhand. We just put it
in the description. We'll track it down and put it in the description. Again,
when you find out what the address is.
I will. Thank you, C.W. Weeks, for putting this together, and I really hope and believe this is really going to be beneficial for a lot of people. So,
yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to hit this little video, and then we'll close this thing out backstage. Don't go away yet, okay?
I'll hang.
All right. Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud.